It is my great honor to introduce our honorary Spotlight Scholar for 2023, my dear, dear friend, Laurel Richardson. Go with me now to New Year's Eve. Tomorrow begins 2023. I am snuggled in bed for the entire afternoon with my pup Molly, who sleeps in her usual spot under the covers between my knees. Ah, retirement. In my hands is a marked up dog-eared copy of Laurel's Fields of Play, Constructing an Academic Life, published in 1997. In spite of the rainy, damp weather outside, it is a perfect day inside, full of memories, affection, and enjoyment. I loved this book when it came out. I appreciate it even more now. This volume, and all of Laurel's work, has inspired me and influenced really all of us in our interpretive, narrative, and autoethnographic communities. Reading the book takes me briefly back to the mid-1980s. I am attending sessions at the American Sociological Association and eagerly looking to connect with kindred spirits there. At a feminist session, I am mesmerized by Laurel Richardson's talk about her work on the new other woman. Her research, her larger-than-life presence, and her performance all fascinate me. Afterwards, I stand in line to meet her, but so does everybody else. When it is my turn, I quickly introduce myself and tell her, I like your work. She thanks me, and when I timidly say nothing more, she moves on to the next admiring person. As I read more, I linger in 1989. I am at Arizona State attending a Society for the Study of Symbolic Interaction Stone Symposium. It is only the second time I've presented at this meeting and the first for Laurel. But already I am hooked by the open-minded, smart, and inviting renegade ethnographers who populate this association. I present a paper entitled Introspective Research in the Lived Experience of Emotions. Audience members enthusiastically make comments, and afterwards, Laurel comes up, says she likes my paper, and asks for a copy. We then talk about the presentation she just gave on the narrative turn, narrative knowing, and moving story to the center of sociology, and how our work intersects. We promise to keep in touch and share writing. And from that moment on, we do, providing a voice for each other and offering support that I think made it possible to dream, experiment, and try out ideas that might have been more problematic without our mutual support. A few chapters later, and I am back in the watershed year 1990. That winter, Laurel comes to the conference Mike Flaherty and I have organized on sociology of subjectivity. She gives a response in a session called Ethnographic Novels, which includes excerpts from Final Negotiations. Her presentation is called Writing Matters in the program, and it morphs on the beach that day into The Sea Monster, an ethnographic drama, and later into her important work on writing stories. Ah, we were heady then and filled with heart, eager to share different ways of doing and writing social science. I have dinner with her and her husband Ernest at this conference. This begins our ritual of meeting and sharing meals at meetings and walking together on the beach whenever we got the chance, where we talk about life, relationships, new ideas, aspirations, losses, and how to best manage life and passions. You're a decade ahead of me, I say on one of our walks. Tell me, from your experience, what might my concerns and passions be like in 10 years? And the experiential stories follow. Laurel has been one of my life muses for close to 35 years, someone I call on often for the loving critiques she provides for most of what I write. She never disappoints, often going straight to the heart of the matter. She has always been available to write letters in support of my and many others' work or awards we sought to receive. and available to join in our joy and celebration when we are successful, and with her words to comfort us and urge us to continue when we are not. And now I honor her in this session, where she will tell her story to old friends and colleagues and new ones as well. Whichever you are, it will be a treat to hear from this distinguished scholar and gracious human being, who, in addition to helping so many of us along the way, has herself had an amazing career. She has had many scholarships, books, and lifetime awards, panels in her honor, and articles and entire journals and books written about her work. She has given many distinguished lectures and published more than a dozen books, many revised and reprinted in a variety of languages, and well over 150 articles and chapters. She continues this work now as an emerita professor at the Ohio State University. Her contributions to our interpretive, autoethnographic, and narrative community, as well as many other scholarship communities, is without parallel. I'm really not sure where we'd be without her. I now turn the Zoom mic over to Laurel, who is an amazing storyteller, and she will tell us a little bit about her life and career. And then maybe I'll ask some questions, or maybe not. We'll see how that all works out. And I will leave time at the end for brief hellos and questions and comments from people who are in the audience. Laurel, would you like to begin?
Carolyn, that's so sweet and gracious of you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. And as I emailed to your note message, as I messaged to you, this is an amazing. Everybody, all the things I've seen separately or that I've attended, I can't believe this is where we are. That 25 years ago, the narrative paper I wrote was considered, wow, that was so far out to write about narrative and sociology. And like now, it's almost embarrassing to mention it. So I'm just so excited about where we are, where everybody is, because of Carolyn and Art and Norman, and we can absolutely not forget Mitch Allen, who's made publishing possible. So I told Carolyn I was just going to start with some stories, and then we'll talk about writing. But when I was, my father was a criminal attorney in Chicago, and his family had been here since 1609 or whatever. My mother's family were Jewish refugees from the Russian pogroms that came here in 1908. On my mother's side, I am a firstborn American. On my father's side, I'm a DAR, if he hadn't married my mother. I had the good luck of being raised my first 3 years in a 3-generation house where my mother's parents spoke Yiddish. So I had the bilingual beginning of my life. I also had the great pleasure or joy of being raised in Chicago on the north side at a time when children could run free, could be outside, play in the parks, be at the park, swim off the rocks, do whatever. So there was a lot of freedom. My life was a little split. I had my Jewish relatives and my Gentile relatives. During the winter, I went to Anshe Emet and became confirmed as a conservative Jew. And during the summer, we went to Presbyterian camp with my father's relatives. While at that camp, I was 2 to 4 years younger than all my cousins and fictive kin. And I'd used the word moniker. And they started to tease me and call me moniker, like that was my name, moniker. And to make up for that, it was painful. I said, well, guess what? My father's going to get a Studebaker, my father's going to have a Studebaker here just after the war. And they're going, you're lying. There's no way. Oh, yes, he is. He's going to have a Studebaker. No, he couldn't possibly have a Studebaker. Comes Friday when the fathers come up to the family camp, and there's Dad and a green Studebaker. How did I know that? How did I know that? Did I overhear him on the phone? But we didn't have a phone out there. Did I hear him talking to my mother, or did I just know it? That question, how do I know what I know? How do we know what we know? Has been the driving question of my whole life. And it's taken many different shapes and forms. As an 11-year-old, and there was a contest for children to write articles for a national Jewish magazine. And boy, I wanted to win the award, which was, I don't know, $50 or something. So I wrote this story about a Jewish boy who was so smart. He got all A's and everything. He was a swim coach. He took care of loose animals. He was kind to everybody. He raised money for trees in Israel. He was perfect. And he was at the registrar talking, and the registrar says, "You're wonderful. You're perfect. You're everything. You're kind. You're smart. You're generous. You're an athlete. You're a scholar." And the registrar brings this boy's application to the committee. And the committee says, "He's wonderful. It's too bad we already have our quota of Jews." Harvard. What did I know about quotas for Jews at Harvard? How was this story anything to do with me? I wasn't ready for Harvard. I wasn't a boy. How did I know that? And how did I know that I could win $50 with that story, which I did? When I got to college, I went to college early at Chicago, and they have a kind of a required system. I had fortunate to pass out of Latin and math, so I wasn't allowed to take those, although my plan had been a Latin teacher. I wasn't allowed to take that. But my favorite class was the top-notch class, the final class, which was the Organization, Methods, and Principles of the Sciences, OMP. I loved this, and I got the word for what my question was, which was epistemology. So that was the end of my college career, was epistemology. At graduate school, I married a mathematician, Herb, and therefore I was required, or they asked me, or they made me, and I was a woman and therefore could not teach intro because no one would believe me. I taught statistics, although I'd had no statistics. But my husband was a mathematician. I stayed a week ahead, or a day ahead, or whatever, of my students. I was a very good stat teacher because I was learning while they were learning. And I ended up teaching graduate statistics even. In fact, at one point in my career, I taught statistics in the math department at Denison University. My dissertation was on pure mathematics, the sociology of knowledge. How do they know? How do they know that 1 + 1 is 2? What proof do they have? Pure mathematics, there's no such thing as pure mathematics. C, I could prove that it was, mathematics was developed, which I did show, based on patronage. Who gave them money? What were the political, social stuff around the development of mathematics? So that was graduate school. My first job was teaching at Cal State Los Angeles, and I was younger than any of my students, who were all working people, families, jobs, working people. I loved them, and they knew so much more than I knew because they had lived longer and I'd had a rougher time in life. How did they know what they knew? Back to my graduate. Ethnomethodology was coming in, and I became an early ethnomethodologist, ethnomethodology, which is a great lead-in for when you're going to have autoethnography, because it's how do people know what they know? That's what ethnomethodology is. How do people know what they know? They have methods, they have ways of claiming knowledge. Then I taught at OSU, Ohio State University. I had postdoc, whatever. The major turning point in my life was I was in a car accident and I had a coma. And I was in the coma for I don't know how long. When I came through the coma, I could do my multiplication tables up to my 5s, and that was it. And even today, I had to think about 8 times 5. Is it really 40? Today, the other day, I was thinking about that. Was it really? But yeah, that was 40. So I lost. I couldn't teach statistics anymore. I wasn't tenured. I was now divorced, recovering from a serious car accident, 2 young boys. I had presented, yes, I'm going on. I had presented a paper called The Door Opening Ceremony. And that at the ASA meetings in New York, and New York Times covered that and made it a central story. In the Sunday paper, it was like the big story, people going in, and it actually, the door opening ceremony is kind of a meme for the feminist organization. Are you going to open a door for me? And my department was not going to tenure me because they thought I had brain damage and therefore could not be tenured. And so a trustee from OSU was in Japan reading his New York Times. Who is this person? He calls the president of OSU. He says, I'll call the provost and find out. The provost calls the chair of my department, who tells them who I am and I'm not being tenured. The provost suggests he change his mind. And so that's how I ended up tenured. And once tenured, it's sinecure. You can do anything you want. And in my case, it became the turning point because I couldn't do math anymore. And I really replaced it with my poetic sensibility. The first paper I wrote, I'm going to stop talking, after the coma was the power analysis in Paradise Lost. I had gotten all jumbled up. The Paradise Lost I'd read as an undergraduate 10 years ago with power analyses from sociology, particularly from Weber. And I just had them all mixed up. So after that, this is 50 years ago. So for 50 years, I've been doing, 45, I've been doing important work, this kind of work, and trying to find out how I know how people know what they know. I'm through talking.
Great. I love the overall theme that goes through your work. How do we know how do we know we know, really? And I love your stories up to this point. But I'm wondering, after this point of the story you just told, which were wonderful, have there been other turning points along the way?
One of the major turning points became the, I know in Fields of Play, which thank you, because I've not read this for 25 years. And when you said you were reading it, I thought, I'll take a look at it. It's a good book. That's what the smart young woman who wrote this book. It's a good. We got a department chair, a new one, who really didn't want to be a department chair and didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to stay home and do his mathematics with the demographer. So one of the things he did was let us choose our own teaching. Well, hello. I taught feminist theory A and feminist theory B and qualitative research A and qualitative research B. And I only taught graduate students for, I think it was 3 years while he was chair. And it was wonderful. So that was a turning point, was having a community right there with me, because I was I was not being rewarded by my own department. I was, quote, too glamorous and I was too glamorous and too rich because I sold a book to the book you were talking about, the other woman, because I'd sold a book. I was too rich and I was too glamorous, and therefore I didn't need, and I was a woman, and therefore I didn't need the same kind of raises like the men did. But that was a turning point, was to have a community right there of we could work together. Yeah, that was a turning point.
And what about turning points in your thinking since then?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. How I was using, and this is just like right now. So I was using, I wanted, when I finished my PhD, the first question from my defense, they asked what was I planning to do, and I said, sociology belongs to everyone. It should be for everybody. And they almost kicked me out of the room and flunked me right then, because that wasn't the right answer. But it was, and it still is. Sociology is for everyone. And so I've been more and more, how do I write in a way that is accessible and meaningful and impactful on people who are not necessarily trained the way I've been fortunate to be trained or learned. So I've been, this is really very recent, Carolyn. I've always tried to make my prose be informed by poetic choices, where the breaks might be, how things might alliterate, particularly ending paragraphs, where the reader can go, I know the next sentence, because they have the answer to the question. So they're involved in the actual process of reading, as if it were a line break from poetry. And that's always been a great pleasure, and why I rewrite. And I always read my prose aloud, so I can, where something doesn't quite work, I stop and start again. I write better than I speak. But now what's happened, after I finished the book that Carolyn was showing you, what, weren't you, Carolyn? I finished a book about, in 1920, my husband died a very horrible death of Lewy body dementia. And no, I was the other one. And in order to for me to survive as a caretaker, since it was COVID and no one was allowed in my house and there was no place for him to go, it was unbelievably horrible. I distanced myself by writing, and I had his permission to write until he couldn't get permission anymore. So I wrote through that. It didn't heal me. It didn't heal me at all. It was a way of distancing myself from the experience. Since that time, I've written a series of poems called For Better or Worse that Norm is going to publish somewhere. But with those poems, what I wanted, which was now the switch around, instead of the prose looking like poetry, I wanted the poems to be a narrative. I wanted the poetry itself to become a narrative, an arc. So for better, to worse. I wanted, now the poems had to fulfill what would be a prose requirement, a fictional prose requirement, a narrative. So it begins with an obit that I wrote when we got married, and moves through his sickness until the end, and then afterwards. And I've just written a couple more actually that I'm going to insert. And that to me is kind of interesting, how I have used the prose now to change how I think about doing poetry, that the poetry can be a story. I mean, we know it can, of course. I mean, we know the ancient stories, but modern poetry has become not that. Does that answer? I think that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And, I had the great honor of reading Laurel's manuscript early on about her husband, who I knew very well, and herself and their relationship and their trials and tribulations. And I was just blown away reading this book. I thought it was just one of the most, if not the most powerful thing I had ever read about dementia. And I was personally interested because my brother had dementia. And when the book was published, I gave it to my sister-in-law, and they're you know, she's high school graduate, and she read the whole book. And she's not a reader, but she really found common experiences. And I think that was helpful to her, even though afterwards she gave me, after my brother died, she gave me the book back. I said, "Oh, you don't want to keep it?" And she said, "No, I really don't want to revisit those experiences because they were just so powerful in this book," which I thought was an interesting response. But I like that, you know, your book could be read by my sister-in-law, who lives in the mountains of Virginia and has a high school education, and speak to her.
Thank you for publishing it. It's published to the Routledge.
Yeah.
Under your Writing Live series. I feel very happy about that.
Yeah, we are very happy about that too. And I have since read Laurel's poetry, and again, just soaked it in. And I was taken by both the similarities and how I felt reading the poetry and some of the differences. And I kind of went back and forth between feeling closer to the experience through the poetry and more distance from the experience, which I thought interesting. And I want to read this, and I don't have your permission to read it, but I think you'll be okay with it. Was just a couple of sentences that Laurel wrote to me on an email. She says, "Hi, poem collection finished, and having finished it, my spirit is improved. That's one thing I am not sure we talk about when writing from our hearts and souls. We think of it as maybe therapeutic, but my, how it triggers and reminds." So I just, that sentence has stayed with me. And would you like to talk a little bit more about these two?
Yeah, thank you. I think writing the poetry, my husband died 2 years and 2 months ago. And the first years of death of a loved one is, of course, very difficult. But you get this kind of support, you know, people are, "How are you?" Da, 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 da. My second year was much more difficult. And I didn't expect that. I thought and I'm in something called hospice art therapy. And that's why my hair isn't, that's how I always do my hair for her. Hospice art therapy. And my second year was just harder. And writing the poems writing the book was distancing myself and including him. Writing the poems, there was no distancing. It was just, there it is. And some of the poems would just form, full form. I'd wake up in the morning and I would have a full form of a poem. And they do feel more in touch with my soul. And yeah, they do just feel more in touch with my soul. I think that's true. More just, yeah. I'm more aware of which, just more aware of a very deep part inside of myself that, yeah. The way I feel about Ernest is not that I don't feel whole. I feel I'm a whole person and I do many different things, but it's almost like I'm missing a limb. It's that kind of feeling. And I think Carolyn Art would get that, and probably others of you have the same kind of, where you have multiple relationships with your spouse besides them being your husband. You write together, you travel together, you this together, you that together. He cooked for me, he took care of me, blah, blah, blah. So it's like missing an arm. Yeah. But yeah, I feel much more I feel much more choosy about what I do, where I go. I feel much more, I have nobody in my life that I don't love. Nobody. I don't do anything I don't love to do or want to do.
Mhm.
And
And
yeah.
was the poetry more influential of these feelings than the narrative book?
Yes, the narrative got me through. I don't think I would have survived the horrible things Ernest did. I mean, he came after, I'm not sure it's even in the book. He came after me with knives. You know, it was horrible, and he was sexually impossible. He couldn't control himself, and he took a dislike to our boy dog Bashi. He got jealous of our dog because it was a boy. Wouldn't allow the dog upstairs. Yeah,
Wow.
crazies, just yeah, nuts, crazy. But I wouldn't have survived that if I hadn't been able to write about it. But the poems instead seem to be not about survival, but about going beyond, regenerating, going somewhere else. They've given me a lot of time to think about death and afterlife, and is there one? And I'm doing fun things. Like I started my this conversation with how I had both Jewish and Gentile backgrounds. I'm taking a class now once a week on Tuesdays from noon to 1 from a rabbi, which is the Jewish interpretation of the New Testament. And in that class, there's Catholic people, Episcopals, Protestants, different kinds of Jews, and I love it. I just love it. It's and I'm going, oh yeah, I'm kind of getting both of these sides together in a different way than ever before. Plus, I like learning. I always love learning.
So I like what you said about the poems. You know, the book was about surviving, and the poems were what happens now.
What happens now, and the poems are. Here's one I wrote not long ago. This is recently. Life now. In my dream, I woke up and wrote this. In my dream, I ceaselessly repeat, marrying Ernest was my worst mistake. Ernest's mother's in my dream on her knees, picking up pieces of a glass memento Ernest broke accidentally on purpose. She stares at me. Your worst mistake was marrying Ernest. I'm right. She is right. If I hadn't married Ernest, I wouldn't be a widow. I sense Ernest in my dream behind me, impatiently shuffling from foot to foot. That is nothing I could have possibly written while he was alive. And yet I sense him all the time, impatiently waiting for me to join him.
So I find this all really interesting. So you're glad you wrote both things, and they seem to be helpful. Even the book was helpful.
It's interesting you say glad. I feel like it's not a gladness issue. There's a no choiceness issue here, which is different. Like, oh, these poems just happen and here they are. And I can accept them and write them down, or I can not. With this one, I never would say, I mean, my God, where's that coming from? The worst mistake in your life is marrying Ernest. Yeah, well, I'm a widow because I married him. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So I was going to go to asking you to talk about being retired and your life as a retired person, in addition to all the experiences that you had with Ernest and losing him.
Yeah, it took me a long time to use that word retired. I've only used it recently. Every year, I have a friend, Tina, and she and I decide on our word for the year. We decide on a word for the year. My word this year is joy. I like that word. For my son, my grandson, I bought a book called People of the Word, which is a book about 50 Jewish words. And the first word in the book is happiness, joy. And it turns out that joy, I don't know, I'm taking Hebrew classes too, that joy has 3 separate meanings in the roots of the Hebrew word joy. So one is what we would think joy, happy, whatever. A second one is learning. That's a second meaning, learning, curiosity, creativity. And the third one is tzedakah, which is giving, and not just charity, but again, the charity and social justice are one and the same. In the tzedakah means both. If I give you $100, that's charity. If I give you $100, that's social justice. They're the same thing. Charity and social justice are the same thing. So joy is those 3 things. And I love that I've chosen that word before I knew that it was all those 3 things. And those are the 3 main things I'm doing.
Right.
I'm doing a lot of intellectual stuff. I'm a book reviewer for some national prizes. I belong to a women's collective that we give money and take care of work on local charitable, underfunded charitable things here. And then oh yeah, this is my fun story. So this is just pure joy. A neighbor moved out and a new man moved in, and on the porch was a cement goose. And boy, I'd been lusting after that goose for 20 years. And I said to the new owner, "Can I buy your goose?" And he says, "No, but I'll give it to you if you let me co-parent it." He took his truck and he drove the goose up to my house, and he says, "And I have naming rights." And he named our goose, Hazel Marie. And Hazel Marie is his mother's name. And it's my job to keep Hazel Marie properly clothed for the weather. She had a yellow polka dot bikini this summer. Right now she's in a blue warm coat with fake fur hat, etc. And this is pure joy. It's my joy, his joy, all the neighborhood's joy is what is Hazel
great.
Marie. Yeah, and it's such a simple nothing thing. It's a cement goose, but it's not. It's not. She's not. She's Hazel Marie.
So your
that's an
life
example.
is full, definitely.
My life is very full. I belong to lots of different groups. I have family here. I haven't answered my big question. Oh, how do I know I know? I finally have answered kind of that. I will never know that I know. And that's wonderful, because that means I know nobody else knows that they know, which means we're all equal, which means there's equity everywhere. And I think this is a perfect example, this program you have here, Carolyn and Tony, of equity. Everybody is equal here. I love it.
So do I. Okay,
yeah.
Two more sets of questions, and then I'm going to open it up to people, to other people to ask questions or make comments or just send you love.
No, thank you.
Do you have a favorite piece that you have written?
Thank you for that question. I've thought of that, and my favorite piece now, of course, are the poems, the newest thing. That's my favorite thing now. Before that, it's an odd one. It's called Reading for Another. And when I was a teenager, my mother was reading Cry the Beloved by Patton, which is story of a Black man and a white man and a Black woman in Africa. I'm reading from my mother's eyes. Who would she identify with? How would she see this? And I loved this exercise because it was, well, if I'm writing for somebody else's story, what about reading through somebody else's eyes? How would I do that? So I loved that. It made reading and writing kind of connected. And I decided from my reading that my mother would have identified completely with the Black woman. And I loved that. I loved that. So that's probably one of my favorites, unknown.
Okay. What about the most vulnerable piece you've written? I'm assuming it's the book and the poems, but I don't know that.
What was the question?
The most vulnerable piece where you feel the most vulnerable?
You know, vulnerability and control kind of go together. And because I have, at this point, such good control over not what I write, but what I publish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mind feeling vulnerable. It makes me feel human.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm never at a place of vulnerability that I can't manage,
Mm-hmm.
because I've controlled my writing and what I've chosen to publish. You'll note I almost never write about my children.
Mm-hmm.
That's a vulnerable place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And one more question. What still burns in your soul to do?
To do.
Yeah, or think or feel or be or.
You know, I have a very good friend named Carolyn Ellis, and we were discussing this on the phone, and she said to me, you know, I'm living my life, and that's like enough. I'm out here in the garden, and I'm deadheading roses, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. And I told my hospice art therapist, Timberly, about my friend Carolyn saying that, living my life. And we thought, that's really good. That's what you should do your art therapy on today, living your life. Mm-hmm. So I did that, and I made a utopia in my life, which was me and Ernest and 2 dogs. Bashi's died. 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 people, lots of music. And then I made my real life, which was just lots and lots of people and a blank. And I don't know what goes in the blank. But my friend Carolyn Ellis is just living her life. So I can just live my life too.
All right. That sounds wonderful. And before I turn it over to other people, I just want to tell you how valuable your friendship and you have been to me over all these years. Just incredibly wonderful and in so many dimensions. So thank you.
Thank you. Same way. It was the same way. I'm crying. I'm gonna cry.
I have a few little tears myself, and I think it's probably okay.
Oh, I want to say, I really love Cesar's thing. And what I went last night after that one, I thought, I am going to talk when I see him in June about possibly putting these poems into a video with 2 voices, my voice and a man's voice. And because they've got all these places, it's got Shenandoah in it, it's got the cemeteries in it, it's like very visual. All the poems are in places, and I thought, yeah, I'd love to be able to know how to do this. So that's on my agenda. That would be wonderful to be a whole different, and to bring together. I have an art world, and I do make quilts. I have an art world and a writing world. It would bring those together in a really nice way.
Lovely, lovely. So I would like to turn it over to anyone who would just like to express feelings to Laurel or say hello or how she's affected your work or ask a question. And if you would raise your hand, I will call on you. And if you don't, I may call on you anyway. So, so be prepared. And if I miss you and you have your hand up, just begin to speak. All right, I'm going to call on you.
Unmute, Art.
There, good.
Unmute.
To unmute. I haven't
There you
mastered
are.
the system
There you
yet.
are.
I just wrote a message there, and I'll read the message. Laurel, you are not only an innovative, poignant, and piercing writer, you also know how to read. Thank you for the many times you have helped me with my writing by reading so closely and honestly and generously. Thank you, thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
Other people who have left comments oh, Ron, go ahead.
Hi, Laurel. How are you? It's just such a treat to sit here and be in your presence for this last hour.
I don't see it. Where are you? Oh, let's put another page. Okay.
I was just sitting here thinking.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Ron.
Hi. I was just sitting here thinking whether or not when you sit down to write, sometimes you know beforehand that you have a very clear research agenda and you may call forth the poetic for that. Other times you may just sit down to write a poem. Does that make a difference for you in how you write and how you orient?
I have decided not to sit down and write a poem unless I have a clear notion of where I want that poem to go. That's a completely different than writing for discovery, which is the prose, The poetry I want already, I actually almost see it in the shape of what it's going to look like. So this one that I read to you, you can see the shape of it. I see it. I almost see them in shapes. Yeah. So no, I don't do that anymore. I don't make myself sit down and. I'm not. What about you?
Well, I've been trying to figure that out for myself. You know, I really, when I use poems in research projects, I'm really trying, I have much more clearly an idea of what I'm trying to use that poem for and where I'm trying to make it go and all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes I just feel motivated to write a poem and it's not tied with any kind of research project. And I'm not sure whether or not that makes a difference in the poem or not. And that's what I've been trying to figure out in terms of my own work. And I'm not sure how I would answer that.
How does it make a difference in how you feel about it?
I think I'm happier when I sit down to just write a poem, to let it go wherever it wants to go. I feel like when I'm working with it as more as a research project, I'm muscling it a bit in a certain kind of direction. So I guess, yeah.
The other feels more spiritual or from soul or similar.
Yeah. Trying to get it to serve more of an end.
Functional, it's much more organic. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of comments on the side. Christine, would you like to read your comment to Laurel? Or I can do that if you want. She may not be where she can read. I will read.
My dog. You hear my dog barking in the background?
No.
No. Okay.
All right, I'm going to read Christine's comment. Christine Keisinger. Joy is my word this year. I did not know why until now. Your words about joy broke my heart wide open. Thank you. This was beautiful.
Oh, great. Christine, we share the same word. Equity, equity, equity. That's the beauty about all of this, right? That we all know each other. What we don't, it's all like underground. It's like it's all there. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Keith, would you like to say something?
I'd love to, and I just have audio right now. Thank you, Laurel, for all your work. Just very briefly, Fields of Play was the first extended writing that I was able to hook a story onto that matched my fascination for what happens to subjectivity within the field. And it's never gone away from me now, this many years later, each time I write intuitively, I believe. So thank you for that. So my question, did you ever have any imagination that writing as a mode of inquiry would be so prolifically helpful to people at the undergrad level too, by the way?
Yeah, no, I did not. And of course, it was like bringing it into social sciences, because I think the people in humanities already knew that. And I had the pleasure, Mark's agreeing, I had the pleasure of having all of that kind of education as an undergraduate, a really good education. So I think, but it wasn't in the social science. No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It was what I was experiencing. And arguments I had with, or discussions I had with friends. I had a lot of friends in the English department.
Yeah. I tell you, we talk about joy. I think that writing brings compassion to the writing process and to mentoring young writers. You don't have to have it all figured out. So thank you again. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Keith. Good to see your name.
True.
So Philip Merkin writes, I feel so honored to have had this opportunity to see the world through your eyes, Laurel. Philip, feel free to come on if you want to say anything more. If not, it's okay.
Mark, I want to say hi to Mark. Mark, hi.
Well, Mark, do you want to say something?
Unmute. That was such a wonderful dinner we had. It was one of the high points of the year. It was just marvelous. Yeah.
I actually was going to comment on that, and I wasn't sure whether this was the place to do it, but in addition to, enjoying your work, I came to the autoethnography conference a couple of years back and really didn't know many people. I knew Art and Carolyn and a few others, and Laurel and I kind of became fast friends, and we wound up going out for a wonderful dinner where we learned an immense amount about one another in a very brief period of time. And that kind of connection brought me joy and also allowed me to feel that that I had a kind of home at this conference. And so I haven't seen you since that time, but it's wonderful to see you now.
Yeah, thank you. What I in the book, in the long book, what I write about you in my book, which is that with Mark, I recognize what I no longer had with my husband. I could no longer converse with him about anything of depth or interest, where I could with Mark, and it just smacked in what I had lost. Yeah, thank you.
Sylvia.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi.
You're muted.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for what I've learned from you. I teach my students a lot sociologically about what you've taught me, particularly that creative analytical process that I insist a lot on with my undergraduate students, and the crystallization, of course. But your masterpiece is Trash in the Corners. I really go into that one because here people are very much into ethnography, and how it is objective. So I have it translated and checked it a lot. And I give it to all my students, graduate and undergraduate students. And
I
think
love that piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Laurel, someone asked, Susie Bass asked about your quilts. My PhD is exploring the impact of craft, identity, and mental health, which I'm making into a quilt.
Wow, yes. I belong to an Art Quilt Alliance. Is Sylvia up here? I don't see her. I mean, I don't know who the
Susie Bass.
Okay. I belong to an
There
Art
she
Quilt
is.
Alliance. Where is she?
If I talk, you
Susie
should be
Bass,
able to see me. Hi.
Hi, and what I bring to Art Quilt Alliance is a more creative. I'm probably the most creative, they say, because I don't have the technical skills. They all bring, they're coming from sewing or from somewhere, and they have the technical skills, so they know how to cut straight lines and sew straight lines. I know how to think outside the box because I've never been in their box.
Can I ask a question? Do you put stories into your quilts? Are you
Yes,
using fabrics that are very special to you? And
yes, I do stories. In fact, my quilts are all narratives, almost all, that I wouldn't. The one I like the best is, well, there's two I like the best. There's one where it starts at the bottom and goes up, and there's horses running around free, and then they're captured, so they've got like lassos around them and so on. Some break through, and then they end up in the sky as a constellation. And I like to think of that as my life. Yeah, then I start kind of free. I get captured. I get to break out, and then I can become a constellation. So that's like a story. It's like a mythic story. Yes, and I've got two quilts up in my bedroom about my family. I was a twin when I was born, but the other twin didn't live. So I've got a twin. I've got one that honors us as if there were 4 children. Then the fourth one goes away because she's not here. So just the 3 of us go through. But yes, I loved using the quilts as a way of telling the story.
thank you.
Okay, I think we'll let Andy have the last word. Andy Stewart writes, I just want to say it's been a pleasure getting to hear you speak. Yours was some of the first autoethnography I ever read, and I love seeing you speak and being able to put a voice face behind your work. Thank you for all the wonderful work you've put in this world, and thank you to Tony and his team for always planning a wonderful conference with great speakers who inspire me each and every year. So I think that's a really good way to end this session and get prepared for the next session, which will be a session on awards and just following this.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
Thank you, Laurel. It was wonderful to be with you.
Created a sacred space. You have created a sacred space, and I'm happy to have my soul part of this sacred space. Both the 3 of you. He's still here. Bye.
Thank you.